Today I'm going to talk about how I make the songs for these videos, and what better way to show how than to show me making it. I ran a poll a while ago of 4 highly requested Pokemon from the comment sections of those past videos, and the winner was Milotic. So to really capture the process well, this video will have me in the process of making the Milotic theme. Hi, editing me. Get a load of this guy. The fuck's your problem? What? Also, I'm going to say the name of this Pokemon in many different ways over the course of this video, so if that bothers you, brace yourself. My DAW of choice is Logic, and for all my Gen 3 to 5 themes I use sound fonts, which are essentially assembled collections of sampled instruments and sounds used in a game. And I play them through the free plugin called Sforzando by Plog. You can find most sound fonts for free with a quick search. While I'd really love to acquire the original sounds of these games by finding and downloading the original sound modules and romplers, those are far from free and would require a lot more work on my end. There's also something to be said about perceived accuracy. It sounds a bit more accurate to the hardware, and especially to people's memories of these classic soundtracks, to use the compressed samples. For Gens 1 and 2, I use another product by Plog called Chip Sounds. Chip Sounds is a plugin that accurately recreates the sound chips of old game consoles. I also limit myself to most of the sound restrictions of the Game Boy Pokemon battle music, that being max 3 channels of tonal audio at a time, and no noise or percussion. Now, for Gen 6 and beyond, of which I've only done one tune, this becomes a lot more difficult as we reach into higher quality modern software that's still in use and as such is very pricey. The sounds used are also a lot more diverse as more composers hop on the team, each using their own preference of sounds and plugins, and some using live instrumentation. Live instrumentation is hard to replicate because I don't play all the instruments, and even if I did play all the instruments, a live recording is so nuanced in its tone that it would be hard to replicate. For Sylveon's theme, I used a mix of an X and Y sound font I found, which had some sounds that really hit the mark and some sounds that left a lot to be desired. I also used some of the original sounds that X and Y used, and I also used some of my own sounds that I processed and sculpted to sound as similar to the X and Y sounds as possible. For the Milotic theme, I'll just be using a Pokemon Emerald sound font. So Milotic really needs to sound majestic and watery and beauty. The whole thing about Milotic is beauty, the most beautiful Pokemon. So something that's striking, but not jarring. So hope so far this intro's capturing that to a degree. One of the easiest ways to quickly get the sound of a Pokemon battle theme, or any RPG battle theme for that matter, is to have chords playing on a key rhythm, like I have with the trumpets here. I go into this a bit more in my RPG battle theme tutorial, but many battle themes have this sort of repetitive key rhythm that they adhere to for most of the piece. And Pokemon definitely has a couple favorite rhythms. This is especially true of the first 3 generations OSTs. Someone once asked me, why do you differentiate Gen 1 and 2 in your videos when they both use the same sounds and operate on the same hardware? And that's a completely valid question to ask. Gen 1 and 2 have a lot of big differences compositionally and sound-wise that differentiate them in big ways. I will be the very first to admit I am pretty bad with being faithful in this regard. Gen 1's music is mostly classically influenced, with the only composer being Junichi Masuda, whereas Gen 2 introduced the GOAT, Go Ichinose, who brings in a lot of jazz influence in addition to Masuda. And I want to have this big surprise where it's like, oh, we've been in D flat, right? This is D flat, we're in D flat, right? Right? Surprise, A flat the whole time. I feel Gen 1 has a lot of chromatic runs, whereas Gen 2 has a lot more clear harmonic implication. Though the biggest change between Gen 1 and 2 is actually the sounds used. Gen 1 mainly uses these longer, more static notes with little variation in their amplitude envelope and typically sticks to a 50% duty cycle. Gen 2 plays a lot more with swells and more sound variety, some more nasal sounds, some more pure sounds. Gen 2 also uses pulse channels for bass a lot more than Gen 1 does. Gen 1 mostly sticks to keeping the triangle as a bass part. If you want to learn more about everything I'm saying right now, I highly recommend these two videos by 8-Bit Music Theory. Anyways, we're not making a theme for a Gen 1 or 2 Pokemon, we're making a theme for a Gen 3 Pokemon. So what are the compositional characteristics of Gen 3? I don't want to do the anime boo ba-doo. It's too anime. Since Gen 1 and arguably up through Gen 5, Pokemon melodies typically consist of a longer, flowing melody alongside a counter melody playing against it and further implying the underlying harmony. Especially in Gen 2 and beyond, the counter melody will often rhythmically contrast the main melody where it can. For example, the main melody plays a long note, the counter melody starts playing a bunch of short notes, and vice versa. This technique was likely born out of limitation, because with only 3 channels, you can't just play chords underneath the melody. So it makes more sense to take a more contrapuntal, Bach-ish approach. It also, of course, just sounds cool, and dueling melodies mirrors the concept of dueling foes very well. Oh, that loops really nicely. Let's try that. Equally as important as the melodic language is the orchestration of Gen 3. For every generation, I listen closely to some battle themes, hear what instruments they like to use for what roles, and steal that orchestration. For example, I know Gen 3 really likes to have string or horn melodies with subtle chip synth counterlines, so I steal that. I have a little counter melody here. I've had little chip counter melodies in the battle themes. I hear in the Frontier Brain theme that they use this low chip synth like a guitar pulsing away, so I steal that exactly. One thing Gen 3 and 4 in particular like to do is have these sort of stacks of melody where 3 or so instruments will all be playing the melody and then split off in different directions at times. Have the trumpet actually. I wouldn't mind a third layer on that melody. Harp, hello. Basically, I listen, study, and note down how these composers construct these tunes in terms of instrumentation, and I copy. I could go into further detail, but I think doing your own studying and listening is really fun, and it's great compositional training. I need to get drums in this. Not having drums is really fucking this up so far. What kit do I usually use? Absol theme, save me. Is it marching snare a bit much? We'll see. Bit chaotic, but I'll fix it later. Where are my hi-hats? I definitely used hi-hats in the Absol theme. I did not use hi-hats in the Absol theme. That's so actually faithful to the source material. Wow. Who would have thought I would do that? Not me. Now, for the more fun question. How do I make it sound like the Pokemon? I like that because it's like both very snaky and like the very like slithery. This is where my lifelong devotion to nerdy-ass music theory and analysis get to see the light of day. For some Pokemon, it's more simple, where you can take the Pokemon's gimmick and musicify it. And at that point, the composition process becomes more like a puzzle. How do I write a song that incorporates Giraffurig's two gimmicks? Well, write some palindrome melodies and phrases that sound the same backwards as they do forwards, and have the harmony oscillate between major and minor, like the dark and light sides of its body. Some other more simple examples are my Zigzagoon theme with its 7/8 zigzag, ostinato, and melodies, and Spinda with its constantly changing time signatures to give the feeling of dizziness. I'm just worried it sounds a bit too dramatic and tragic, and not quite fun. I guess it's not really a fun Pokemon. I mean, it's a fun Pokemon, but it's majestic and it's. Is it too? Might be too bright. It's hard to tell. Some are more difficult and need a more vague interpretation. For Eevee, I used slash chord harmony that never really lands on a solid home base, to give a feeling of unresolved brightness and expectancy that I think fits Eevee as a blank slate sort of Pokemon that can go in many different directions. For Absol, I tried to make the music match that classic story with Absol, a misunderstood warning of disaster. The first section being the initial perception of it, a scary harbinger of doom. But the second section begins to show its true character, first resolving minor, then major, as we get a bright look at it, and then the third section being the disaster it warned about. That's great. I also sometimes directly reference existing songs that relate to the Pokemon, which is always fun. The Evolution theme with Eevee, Relic Castle with Volcarona, and Floraroma Town with Leafeon. In this song, I indirectly gesture towards the lake theme from Gen 4, and play with the general Pokemon association of harp with water that's on display in most surf themes. I just doubled in a aquatic instrument. Double the vibe, double it with vibes on the way down, maybe, to just get at a more aquatic element. In this next section, we're gonna have rolling vibes. I always work with some pictures of the Pokemon in question readily available. Looking at the Pokemon and how they're depicted can give ideas and remind how the music should feel. I almost always create the classic Pokemon noise burst intro last, as those intros are always designed very intentionally to both be a disorienting alarm, as well as to signal the vibe of the piece and lead into the first real bar of music. And you can't signal the vibe of the piece unless you already know the vibe of the piece. The place where I likely deviate the most from Pokemon's style is the harmony. I sacrifice a good bit of faithfulness to the original soundtracks in favor of trying to evoke the Pokemon as much as possible through harmony. Often, these songs are not easy for me to make. This is a tough tune. I don't like this. I don't think this is good. Damn it. And takes several attempts and a lot of development on an idea before you get to the right vibe. I can't tell if it's good or not. Oh man, I really wanted to make this too. I have no idea if this is good or not. The Milotic theme you've been hearing me work on is the second try. My first try sounding way too bright and peppy, and not really capturing the beauty or majesty of Milotic. Not necessarily bad, but just unfitting. Which is low-key how I feel about my Luxray theme, but let's not talk about that. But every song and attempt is a learning experience and makes me a better composer. And if you compose, I highly recommend doing post-mortems of your songs, thinking about what you could have done better and what really hit. With all of that said and done, here is my theme for Milotic, in the style of Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Feel free to request more Pokemon you want themes for, and I hope you got something out of my breakdown and process. Thanks for watching.